What's going on, you rapscallions out there? It's your GM, Jared, and today I'm joined by Steve.
Yep.
And we are going to have a educational session. So listen up, you fives, because a 10 is about to speak. And that 10 is Steve. Steve hit me with so much knowledge that it hurt. I had to sit down and I was at work. And Steve's about to drop some knowledge on skill checks and how they work with the tier system within Pathfinder 2nd Edition. So if you don't know, the tier system is basically when you take a skill in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, you will usually start out in it as trained, and then it goes from trained to expert, from expert to master, and from master to legendary, legendary being the highest. And most of the time, a player, if they reach highest tier of play, will be legendary in maybe 1 or 2 skills. So I was having a conversation with Steve, and I was like, wow, this changed the course of how I will forever GM because of the tiered system within Pathfinder 2nd Edition. So listen up, you fives out there, because a 10 is about to drop some knowledge on you. So Steve, take it away.
Oh, this is a big intro. I got a lot to live up to. All right. So Jared and I had a conversation about, he was trying to figure out how to give us information and what skill checks would be used and how to make sure, and what happens if they don't make the check. You know, sometimes, you know, look, anytime you're leaving it up to the dice, you can roll bad. You can always, doesn't matter if you have a plus 10 million, if you roll that 1, how do I feel like, oh, you rolled the 1, I'm still going to give you the information. So how do you feel like that information is earned? And you're not going to feel the information is earned because you know you rolled the 1. So there's a couple of different ways that you can do this. And number one, a lot of checks in Pathfinder. This is something I know Jared hates. I know he's going to turn, he's going to hate when I say this. A lot of checks, not a lot, but enough of them are called secret checks, where the DM rolls and the player doesn't know what they roll, so they can't infer based on their die roll how good or bad the information is. So you're trying to remember that crucial piece of information about that monster. A lot of times you're recalling knowledge in Pathfinder, so that's the action you're taking, is recalling knowledge. I'm trying to think, do I know this thing? And you roll that 1, or you're making a stealth check. Well, you believe you're stealthing, but you rolled that 1. So the player's behavior may change if they know they rolled badly. Or if you roll that 1 on a knowledge check, you may be given false information, and you know, if I know I rolled that 1, I know not to trust it. So there's some metagame that could happen if I know something bad happened. Now, obviously, if I'm climbing a tree and I roll badly, I'm going to fall. I know immediately that I roll badly. So I can see that roll. It's not going to affect my actions because I already know that's a potential failure state.
So I would like to chime in. In my head, whenever a player rolls a 1 on stealth and it's a secret check, the John Cena song comes on and they just walk by going like this. Sorry, that's canon now, by the way. But take it away, Steve.
And I think that the Pathfinder 2nd Edition system of ever increasing rank of skill really gives you a way of parsing out information. Because even baked into the rules, if you don't have a check of a certain type, so if I am untrained in Arcana checks, there's a lot of stuff I can never roll for Arcana. It's just the game. Just if you want to play well, if you're actually running by the rules, I have to be at least trained to do certain things. And then even when you're talking about picking locks, there's some locks that I have to be even expert in thievery to even attempt to disable those. So given that information, Jared's like, man, if they don't get this crucial piece of information, they like, how do they progress? And he was having such a hard time. And I go, well, without getting too much information because obviously I'm a player in that same game. But he goes, without getting too much information from Jared, and he goes, what kind of check is it? Because that's going to come up in the game anyway. He goes, oh, well, that's an Arcana check, or that's a perception check, or that's a this or that check. So knowing what kind of check, and I'm not going to just immediately change my character and it's like, oh, now I'm a legendary in that skill, you know. So what kind of check is it? And he goes, oh, okay. Well, like based on that, I could surmise it's either about let's say it was like a nature check. I was like, well, it's okay.
Survival in nature.
Yeah, well, it was initially a nature check, and he goes, well, it's a nature check, and I'm pretty sure no one has nature. I'm like, how do I help? Like, how do I don't want to screw the players and say, well, none of you know this, and then they were running around in circles for an hour. And he goes, well, I know there's someone with survival. I don't think it was me. I might have had it, but I know it was someone else in the party had survival. I'm like, well, you can make it a first of all an option where you can, even though the game You may have wrote it, or maybe you're reading an AP, or maybe this is an adventure, or you just thought in your head, man, this is just a nature check. Like, I don't really see how survival can help you here. But all your players are just, they don't have it, right? They just decided not to pick that character, that option, and they go, man, no one can roll this check. But that's a crucial piece of information. Let them roll another skill. Like, if it makes sense, let them roll another skill. The other thing is the system where it says you have to be trained at a certain level, that you can use that to say, okay, well, you're an expert in Arcana, right? You're really good at knowing magic, magic BS, right? You know all the things about Arcana that an expert would know. Well, Jared's character, like my character is an expert, and then Jared's character is just trained. So he was picked it, but it's certainly not his focus. Mm-hmm. Well, he can give, like, me as an expert, and the fact that I have a larger base knowledge, he can just say, okay, as an expert, you already know this. This is just knowledge that you will know, that is common knowledge for you, but the trained person will have to roll. So maybe the trained person rolls and I roll, maybe I can get, so the trained person's roll, if successful, is the same information I get automatically without a roll. So I already know that base information. Yet again, key thing here is never make the players roll a check if you're not prepared for the failure. If you can't parse out the failure because it is too crucial, give it to the players. That's like golden rule number one. I should open with that. Mm-hmm. But and then with the different, like, trained, expert, master, or legendary, you can just say, okay, well, you're such high trained in this thing. Here you go. And if you want to make a check to get a bonus or to get maybe more information, it's okay to, like, make the check and, okay, well, during the next encounter, when you're in the next encounter, or during while you're tracking this thing, or during whatever the thing you're doing that's relevant to that information, you get a bonus to everything you're doing. Mm-hmm. Right. So I didn't get any more information, but that may lead to other successful checks down the line. Or just like I said, I'm an expert. I already got the base level of knowledge, so we didn't have to make that check, and we're going to operate on that knowledge. And I make the check, and I go really well because it's kind of my focus. And I even get more information, which maybe narrows the focus or gives me an extra clue on to key me in on something that's important later. On the exact opposite take of that, you can make something where a lot of people, you're going to get trained in a lot of skills. There's a lot of skills you're going to get trained in that you never really focus on, because you're going to, I'm not saying you never, but a lot of times people focus on that 2 or 3 skills that they want to be really, really good at. They generally don't parse out a lot of skill points and be, like, expert at a whole bunch of stuff at, like, later levels. A lot of times you're going to see, like, 3 skills that are legendary or master, and maybe, like, a bunch of skills that are trained. So you can even say, like, later down the line, you can still do base stuff with like a trained athletics. I can still try to trip somebody. I can still try to grapple somebody. If I have acrobatics, I can still try to tumble through somebody. But if I have, like, trained in with society, I may not know a lot of information about, like, thieves guilds and stuff like that, and I'd be in a really high level area because, say, we're like 16th level. I, as a person who's trained, may not even be allowed to make a check because I don't know enough. And you can say, no, you don't know anything enough to know this really obscure piece of lore or this very secret knowledge because you're not trained enough. But the master, they can make a check, and the legendary person is just going to get the information.
So that's kind of what blew my mind, right? Because I was so focused on how to make this work, and I was worried about the failure. And that was the key, was the failure, right? Like, again, Steve's right. The golden rule of checks are be prepared for failure of a roll. But with second edition and the take of having people with master, expert, and higher tiers, you now don't have to worry so much as a failed roll. Because I could say, okay, Steve, you're trained in society as expert, and, you know, my 2 other players are only trained. So you know, Jill and Joe, please make your society checks. Okay, someone rolled in that one, so they don't know anything, and someone rolled a 10 altogether. Well, you get a little bit of information. Oh, you know, like the proper course is usually you use utensils at a dinner party going from the outside in. But Steve, because you're expert, you know how to fold a napkin. You can really kind of like ham it up. And using that, I would say now, if you kind of correct people or try to aid people in society checks, you can start giving them flat +2s. Because I'm just going to say you've mastered that check, or a +1, right? Because a +2 is a critical success. I'll say, oh, you just give people, if you aid, take the aid action, you give that person a +1. Not even going to make you roll for it. But if you want that +2, please make your check. And then that's if someone get a 1, and then you could have your humorous thing. Steve leans across the table and his tie falls in the soup, and everyone has like a good laugh, right? And that's what kind of changed my perspective very quickly. Was like Steve was like, yo, just. Does someone have expert? Yes. Okay, then don't worry. Let them roll. Let the people who don't have that knowledge roll, that trained, and then let the expert at the end, if they fail, right? Just be like, hey, expert, you know which way to go. But the role was to see if the other people could, also interact. And that was a really interesting thing. It also made the person feel like it was valuable. Because we always talk about high-level play, like the blacksmith with legendary training is like, I can make swords. Right? But early on, you want to make that blacksmith feel like it's valuable, right? So they go from training to expert. Because if you let everyone keep rolling, even if you're an expert, in my head, it now devalues that bump. And like Steve said, by also in the opposite end, at higher levels, you're not cool enough. You're
not the cool club.
You're not sorry, like you didn't train high enough. You don't have enough knowledge to make those rolls because maybe you're on the outer plane and you're trying to planar travel and you didn't take enough arcane or occultism or whatever. So you don't know what plane you're on. You're like, it's got 2 suns and everything seems to be on fire. So we might be on the plane of fire. For all I know, right? Like you just don't know. And then the person will be like, well, I'm trained. Can I roll? Be like, sure, but you're going to need that nat 20. Like, I'm not going to stop you from rolling, but you definitely, it's so high. You just need, it's like a 20. You have to roll a 20 on your die. Sure, you got that small % chance, knock yourself out. And then the person doesn't feel bad. Even if they roll and they got like a 2. It's like, okay. The funny part is if they haggle you for it and you're like, okay, go ahead. And they roll that 1. And then you're like, oh, critical failure. Well, you stuck your hand in the vent and now it's on fire. You're on fire. Stop, drop, and roll. Or you're like, oh, or you're like, oh, this is the plane of fire salt. Everyone's like, what's fire salt? And you're like, oh, the dirt. The dirt is actually all salt. And you convince people to eat dirt. Which I think is humorous, right? Like I like to have fun with it. But that's what blew my mind. Like Steve actually literally, I've been GMing on other streams. And I feel like an idiot now. Like I legitimately feel
not my intention.
No, but like I feel like and again, this is a good reason again to you're never done learning. You're never done as a GM like growing because someone might have a completely different view on how to do something and it will change your perspective. And I know we see a ton of these videos out here of like how to do X, how to do Y, how to role play better, how to be better. And those videos wouldn't be here or being created if there wasn't a want for people to be better. And, it just so happened that it was one of my players who I was on the phone with, and I was like, oh, I can't figure this out. I don't want them to fail because it'd be boring to have them running in a circle, chasing their tail. How do I do it? And he was just like, dude, like one of them's expert, man. Like she knows, Tina knows off the bat. So just let them roll. And it worked out famously. And that's how I'm going to start operating. So I mean, I could ramble all day long, but I don't want to ramble. So Steve, so more thoughts on this? Any more thoughts on the skill system? On
the other side of it is never be afraid for your characters to fail. Never be afraid to go, okay, you're going to, okay, so maybe you could say there's one expert and there's a bunch of people who train and there's a bunch of people who just don't have any skills in this at all.
Yeah.
All right, expert, make your check because maybe it's a little more obscure. So maybe you can say, well, both the trained and the expert can roll for the same result, but obviously the expert's going to be better at it for the most part. But like I said, we're not trying to avoid failure, but you just have to be prepared for it. So if they're making this check and you're by the definition of dice rolls, you're saying there's a potential that you all roll bupkis. You all roll ones, you all roll low, or the person who's trained rolls decent, but it's not high enough because they don't have the extra pluses that the expert does, and the expert rolls negative numbers for some reason. You know, and it happens, but you have to be prepared for that. If that's not something that your game can withstand because they need this critical piece of information, give them the critical piece of information, but have a legitimate reason. And also, like Jared said, I, as a character, have invested part of my, like, it's an option, right? So I have an option. I can pick any skill I want, but I picked that skill. And you never want to feel the character wasted their option or their skill point or whatever the option is. And we've all been in that situation where the person who spent all their time and all their effort into that one thing, and the person who didn't spend virtually any effort into that one thing outrolls them. And it's like the worst feeling.
Yeah.
So given something in there to where they said they get something basically for free, and the cost was they had to pick that option. So it's not for free. Don't think of it as something you're giving them for free and then they didn't earn it. They earn it by the fact that they picked that thing. So, but you don't want to overuse this to where they expect they should be giving something at every opportunity. But when that critical piece of information comes up and you go, okay, well, you know that the elementals, like the creatures here are elementals. You don't have to roll. You just know that they're elementals. So you already by default know you're on some elemental plane that could support life of these elementals that are walking around that are on fire. You could surmise that they're fire elementals. Okay. Or at least some type of elemental that uses fire. All right. Now I'm going to roll, and now I may get a plus to this next roll, or I'm going to be able to get more information that maybe the trained person can't get.
Also, I feel sometimes language can change how someone views a answer. So you don't perceive any traps versus there aren't any traps is a excellent way to value and change how a player might take information. So now we have two thieves, right? So two thieves, right? So you have the Gray Mouser and Indiana Jones, right? Both of them amazing thieves. But the Gray Mouser is an expert in thievery. But Indiana Jones is trained, right? Because he breaks into ancient temples. The Gray Mouser broke into thieves' guilds and steal stuff, right? Right from underneath the arch wizards and stuff like that. So the Gray Mouser is taking up the rear, it maybe has lower hit points, doesn't want to keep moving forward. Indiana Jones goes forward and rolls, and he's only trained, right? So they roll and they go, oh, I got a 16. Oh, well, you don't perceive any traps. So they roll, they get a 16, and they're like, okay. And the GM's like, well, you don't perceive any traps. And the player's like, oh, I don't perceive any traps. What does that mean? And the person's like, all right, well, I'm going to wait. And then I'm going to go back and now initiate role play, right? So that's the other half of the TTRPG. You have your tabletop, and then you got your RPG, your role-playing game. And they go back and they say, hey, Gray, I don't feel comfortable about what I'm seeing. Can you give it a once over? And that player, again, initiating, now you have two same characters, right? Initiating role play, and that person comes forward, the Gray Mouser comes forward and is like, oh, okay, I'm going to make that roll. And they go for the die and go, no. You've seen kind of hallways like this. You know the scope of hallways. You know there aren't any traps. And now that person's like, oh, I know there aren't any traps. Both of them valued that answer. The Indiana Jones character could have just said, okay, I feel like I'm safe knowing that I don't perceive any traps, but I'm going to hesitantly go forward. But now you know what I'm saying? Like the way you say certain things can also make players feel valued in what their skills. And I feel like that's kind of what Steve's getting at. And the heart of this whole conversation is value of your players' choices. Yeah, we're talking about skills, but this kind of like peeks into the value of choices, player choices.
And even at the end of the day, like, I know that we focus a lot on them. We're talking a lot about the Pathfinder 2nd edition skill system, but this can be done with any system. Any system that has the skills or has like a way for a character to focus on a specific type of actions. And because we definitely use this in index card RPG, where if you have a higher if you're trying to use your thieves tools, right, to find something, and then someone is just doing it raw with their with their basic dice, obviously using your thieves tools is going to give you a better die, and it's probably going to give you a better focus with your target number. You can definitely do similar things to where you can use this different type of language or give this other person a different, like, okay, well, my plus is like a +5 versus your +2. Okay, well, the +5 person, maybe already you might just give them some free stuff in knowledge or description that the +2 person has to earn. But you earned it by investing so heavily into this one aspect of your character. So, like, don't think that this is just a Pathfinder Second Edition thing. This is you could use this in almost any system that uses skills or player choice to gain benefits in a certain action. So you can use this in D&D 5e, and is a person proficient or not proficient? It's not even a homebrew thing. It's just a GM thing. It's just to make the players feel that their choices matter, and also giving you a way out if failure is not an option.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of key here, is to allow your players to roll. And if failure does happen, you also have a backup on your failure. It's giving yourself like, that's why parachute also has a secondary chute in case the first one fails, right? Like, that's kind of the key here, is like, how many times, like, I've been there. Oh, I know the rogue is going to pick this lock. Roll 1. I've been at that table. Everyone's been at that table where the rogue rolls a 1 to pick a lock. And then, like, there's a clank, clank. And you're like, oh, I guess the guards come around the corner and roll initiative now, and you didn't want that to happen because maybe they were low on hit points or they were low on stuff like that, and then you don't want to, like, I mean? Like,
but if he's master in that stealth check, and you all look like you're just statues in the hallway, and he's only trained in thievery for some reason, but he's master in that stealth, and maybe he can help cover his friends who are like, look like statues, and they all just like pick up a helmet and just hold it in and just like hope that they look like statues. And so never be afraid of failure, but keep in mind that if your situation can't hold failure, sometimes it's okay to just give them the answer. Sometimes. So with that being said, I want to say thank you very much to my co-GM and my rules arbiter, Steve, for that little kernel of information, some useful tips here. Hopefully you take away something useful for your own personal game. And as always, we are Nothing Venture, Nothing Game. I'm your host, GM Jared, and I said that was Steve, so now I'm saying this is Steve again. So say goodbye, Steve. Later.